Good morning. My name is Roy Canterbury. I'm going to be your host today on Archery Talk 101. What we're going to talk about today is how to shoot your bow in the wind and the effects on the arrow when you're doing it. When I was coming up with the idea for this, we were having some pretty serious winds from 20 to 30 mile an hour with gusts up to 40 mile an hour. And I happened to think, well, how do you shoot when you have wind? Let's go back to shooting indoors. There's no wind. Your arrow flight is not affected by anything. So when you get outdoors, you're going to have some wind going on. There's going to be, from basically no wind on real calm days to days that have a slight wind and may not affect your arrow much at all. Then as the wind gets a little bit stronger, you're going to have a little bit of effect of the wind on where your arrow is going to impact. So let's look at the difference between vanes and feathers. Vanes, being very small, and a lot of them are very low profile, they're not going to collect a lot of wind. So they're not going to be affected very much until your winds start a little bit more. Now your feathers, on the other hand, because they have a lot more drag, they're naturally going to collect a little bit more wind. So now as you get a slight wind, you're going to start pushing more on the fletch side instead of the tip side. So you're going to point, your arrow is going to point into the wind, which is going to mean that your arrow is going to have a tendency to hit into upwind side. Now as your wind gets a little bit heavier, it's going to go a little bit more pushing on the fletch side of it and send a little bit more upwind. But then as your wind gets a little bit stronger, now you're going to see the arrow, it can be moving the whole thing because now there's enough wind that's going to move the whole thing. So now you start impacting to the left or downwind side. So that's something that you're going to have to look at. How do you know what your arrow setup is? The speed of the arrow is going to affect how it works as well. The faster the arrow, the less time it has to be affected by the wind, the slower it's going to be affected. The lighter arrows are going to be affected more because there's less resistance to being pushed around. Your heavy arrows, on the other hand, they're not going to be moved quite as much because it's a little bit heavier. It takes a bit more force to move them off course. So what you're going to do is you're going to take and try shooting outdoors when there's no wind and see what it does. And then pick a day where you have a slight breeze, say like blowing from your right to your left, and see how it affects your arrow. And then, maybe from left to right, and shoot your arrows at different ranges to see, because the further you're away from it, at like at 20 yards, it doesn't have as much time. You go back to 30, 40, 50, if you shoot at 60 yards or longer, you're going to have a lot more time for that wind to affect that arrow. So the only way to really know what you're going to do in your archery setup is to look at the arrow, how it's affected in different wind conditions. You're going to start off with slight winds and then try a day when it's a little bit windier out and see how your arrows are shooting. Then you can go into a little bit higher winds or gusting winds and see how your arrow flies. Then you also have to look at how are you affected by the wind. If the wind is a constant pressure on you at constant speed, you're going to lean into that wind and stand up because it's going to have a tendency to kind of push you off and move you around. So now as you get a little bit more, it's going to start pushing you around a little bit more. You're going to lean a bit more into it, which you can compensate for, but it's those gusty winds that come up. When you have a wind that blows, all of a sudden you get a gust, it stops down, you get used to the gust, you're leaning into it, and all of a sudden the wind goes away and now you start leaning forward, you're starting to bounce around. So how do you keep control of your bow during those wind conditions? That's the difficult part. That's something that is very difficult to overcome, but with practice you can learn how to compensate for it. So you just need to get out there and shoot on those windy days. Now, I wouldn't recommend going out on days when you have 30 mile an hour winds, because that's going to be hard to even stand up and keep everything going. You just got to remember that you don't want to start panicking and all of a sudden start slamming on that trigger. It's like, oh, the target goes by. That's not what you want to do. You still want to go through your same shot process of shooting. It's just now you have to worry about the wind blowing. How's it going to affect that arrow? Then take a look at what happens if you have a wind from the back. Now you're shooting with the wind. How does your arrow affect it? Is it shooting high? Is it shooting low? Is it planing and going really high? Or if you're shooting into the wind, are you dropping low because the pressure is pushing back on the arrow? So you just need to shoot in all these different wind conditions. Ideally, you get on a nice calm day where there's just a slight breeze to keep you from getting too hot in the summertime when you're doing shoots. But that's something you really need to practice on. And there's a lot to that. So one of the best things you can do is probably get with a coach, and then they can help you through some of the problems that you have in shooting in those windy conditions. They can see what you're doing with that. And, that's just one of the things that it helps is if you have a coach that can review your shooting and see what's going on. So that's kind of been what I wanted to talk about today. I didn't want to make it a too long one, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea, something to think about when you're going out there doing some shooting. One way you can get some help is joining the Archery Talk 101 Facebook group. I'll leave a link in the description of how to get to there, and you can join that, and you can always ask questions out there. There's archery instructors and bow techs out there in the group that can answer some of your questions. And then you can look at going out to archerytalk101.com, and there is other articles that you can look at, bring you information. Some of the products that I recommend will be out there as I review a product. I'll put a link into it and make it easier for you to find it. And then if you really want some coaching, I have an online coaching program that allows you to get on there and get some instruction. There's some video part of it as well as the training, and it'll be done on a Zoom call, similar to what we're doing here, except be live interaction between you. And I'll leave a link in there to take a little questionnaire and see if it's a coaching that would work for you. You can book a 15-minute call, and I can go over, some of the concerns that you might have, and give you some information and give you a little quick 15-minute worth of information that might help you out. And once again, my name is Roy Canterbury, and I've been your host today on Archery Talk 101.